Pretty Knitting. I'm Madeline.
And I'm Andrea.
And this is episode 125.
This is a slightly unusual episode. We typically broadcast from our studio in Offenbach, Germany, but today we're on Prince Edward Island in Canada. So we came here to attend and cover the Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival. But if you've been following the news lately, you'll know that the festival was cancelled due to Hurricane Fiona. So Hurricane Fiona slammed right through the centre of Prince Edward Island, making it one of the most severe hurricanes the island has ever experienced. But as you can see, we have survived. We're safe and sound, although I have to say it's pretty chilly in here because we haven't had electricity or power for 4 days. We've been eating our canned food and drinking our bottled water. We're snuggled up with blankets on underneath the table here. And we're really hoping that our batteries and our cameras are going to hang out and last until we're finished filming this episode, and then we're going to travel down to Fleece and Harmony Woolen Mill and hopefully use their generator to edit and then upload onto YouTube. So that's the plan. Okay, so we'll talk more about Hurricane Fiona in just a moment, but let me first of all tell you what's included in this episode. It is always tough for us to prepare and release a proper 90-minute episode whenever we're travelling and just filming new content for the show.
Yeah, and when a hurricane hits you.
That definitely adds to the difficulty. So this episode mainly consists of a feature interview with the artist and knitwear designer Brandon Mabley. Brandon is an artist in his own right, but he's also part of the K Facet collective of artists. I think this is a really fun interview because Brandon is witty and zany and very warm-hearted. And during the interview, we do cover a lot of topics. So Brandon shares personal things like when he first met Kaif at a London bus stop and the early days working together with Kaif in his London studio. He also talks about how he puts colours and patterns together, and with a lot of humour, Brandon shares with us that when we're working with colours, there is a fine line between creating an exciting, vibrant craziness or ending up with an ugly eyesore. So I do think he's a really good communicator and particularly a really good encourager. And that really comes through in the interview. So I think with this interview, you can just relax, sit back, get comfy, and really enjoy quite a few laughs.
Yes, but before we get to the interview, we do have some knitting projects to show you.
We do. Madeline has been so diligent with her knitting. I've been working on my boa stickling again, but I'm actually working on 2mm needles and I'm just going so slow. I'm a real tortoise with this one. I think I'm even... It looks even finer than a machine knit garment.
But you are up to the ribbing already, so
yes,
you're getting there.
Well, only on the body. Okay, so we'll show you more knitting, but first let's get back to Hurricane Fiona. So we arrived on Prince Edward Island 4 days before the festival was due to start. That's because we wanted to get over our jet lag, and we also had a couple of feature interviews that we wanted to film. And I am so glad that I planned it that way because we actually got those interviews finished. So it means that we won't come home completely empty-handed.
Yeah, that was some good planning.
Yeah, lucky planning.
Yeah.
But so then the news of Hurricane Fiona came, and they decided to cancel the festival just before the majority of vendors and teachers had left their homes to travel here. We decided to stay, and we decided to stay for a few reasons. First of all, we had also planned to do further interviews after the festival, and we'd already invested quite a lot of time into preparing those interviews, so we didn't want to give up on them. And of course, we've come so far, and it's our first time on Prince Edward Island. And the other reason was that this was the first time that I was going to meet my good friend Kim from Fleece and Harmony in person. This is the joy of our modern world and the internet. So I've really got to know Kim very personally, but I had never met her in person. So I didn't want to give up on spending some time with her. So we decided to stay. And Madeline and I had never experienced a hurricane before because you don't get them in Europe or where I grew up in Australia. So we prepared by buying canned food and bottled water, but really we weren't that worried. In fact, I think Madeline you might have been looking forward to experiencing your first hurricane.
Well, I'm not sure about looking forward to, but I was very curious, I have to admit, because I love to watch storms. But it's really crazy to see all the devastation the hurricane caused.
Yeah, it is amazing. But I have been so impressed because when you walk around the streets or you just talk to people, people are still smiling. They still look really laid back. It's just they're taking it all in their stride.
They've got a very good attitude.
Yeah, maybe it is an island attitude, I'm not sure, or small community attitude, but I was really impressed by that. Okay, so then we got to Friday, and Friday was was meant to be the first day of the festival. And by Friday, there was a small group of us outsiders who had remained on the island. So there was the yarn dyers, Cap and Boy Knits. There was the authors of the Saltwater Mitten series, Christine and Shirley, ourselves, and also a group of knitters from all different parts of Canada. So during the day, we all headed down to Fleece and Harmony Woolen Mill to hang out together. Madeline snuck in a quick interview with Cap and Boy Knits, which you'll see in a future episode. And then in the evening, we all gathered together at the Delta Hotel with our knitting and a couple of stiff drinks. And that was a really fun evening because the Saltwater Mitten ladies, Shirley and Christine, they're both from Newfoundland, and they were constantly singing Newfoundland's praises with wild stories and telling Madeline that she'd find a husband there in the first 5 minutes after she arrived if she went. So they were a real hoot. And then Madeline dragged me home around 10:30 p.m, which was really good timing because the weather was starting to get very wild. We just got into bed around midnight before we lost all the electricity. So the night was very wild, and I don't think many people anywhere got a lot of sleep. And in the morning, we got up, we looked out the front window to find a tree had fallen on top of the car right next to ours. Our hired car is the white one. And several planks of plastic panels were stripped off from the building next door, and they were also blowing around our car. So Madeline and I just ventured out and cleared the debris around our car so that we could back it out and find a more open space to park it in case another tree came down. And one of the problems was that in the previous weeks there'd been a lot of rain on Prince Edward Island, so the soil around the trees was fairly loose and soggy already, and that meant that many more large trees came down than otherwise would have. And in our street alone, there were several places where trees had fallen on the power lines, so it was very clear to see that it would be a long time before anyone had electricity or hot water.
Yeah, so on the news, they were making a very big deal about this hurricane. So I tried to find out why Hurricane Fiona was so unusual. And this is my understanding of it. So usually when hurricanes start around the equator and travel north, they will veer east, away from the Canadian coastline. And this is because of the Coriolis effect. So I had to look up the Coriolis effect. Basically, the Earth rotates from west to east, and it rotates faster around the equator than it does at the North Pole. So when a storm starts at the equator, it rotates together with the Earth at the same speed. As the storm travels north, it keeps rotating at its initial speed, but the Earth is now rotating slower. So the storm overtakes the rotation of the Earth, which makes it veer towards the east instead of travelling in a straight north direction. But Hurricane Fiona hit an intense upper level trough, which means the pressure in the upper atmosphere was very low. And this forced the storm westward. They call this a left hook. And the centre of the hurricane ended up travelling right over Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, where we are. So we had peak wind gusts of 131 kilometres an hour through the city of Charlottetown, and other parts of PEI had winds reaching 170 kilometres an hour. Also, hurricanes usually weaken as they travel north because of the progressively colder waters. But this year, the Canadian water temperatures were between 6 degrees Celsius and 11 degrees Celsius higher than usual. So Hurricane Fiona kept a lot of its intensity instead of petering out. And this storm was wider and it lasted longer than any previously recorded storm in this area.
So it was a pretty good first hurricane for us to experience, wasn't it?
Pretty impressive, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, and thanks for that little bit of science.
It was my pleasure. It was very interesting to read up on.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to some knitting now, and we'll have Bring and Brag with you.
Yes, with me. So during our recent trip to the UK, we were gifted some gorgeous yarn here. And I found a good pattern to go with it. It's called Lake Reed.
I'll hold up all the colours.
Yeah, it's very pretty. This is the pattern. It's called Lake Reed. As you can see, it's a hat. It's a free pattern by Azita Krebs on Ravelry. It's extremely popular with over 2,000 projects on Ravelry. So that alone, I think, recommends the pattern. But I also found it very clear and easy to follow. And by the way, Mum interviewed Azita Krebs back in episode 96. Azita is one of the organisers of the Swiss Yarn Festival. You're trying on my hat there. So she's one of the organisers of the Swiss Yarn Festival, and she's also a really good spinner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But before I tell you more about the pattern, I do want to talk about the yarn, which is Pebble Island by Rowan. And the yarn is spun by the Yorkshire woolen mill Laxton's, and the colours were designed by the British designer Erica Knight. We interviewed both Laxton's and Erica Knight during our latest trip to the UK, so you have those two interviews to look forward to. And the yarn itself also has an interesting backstory. So it's 100% merino, and it comes from a single flock of 6,000 sheep on Pebble Island. Pebble Island is the third largest offshore island in the Falklands. So it's named after the unusual translucent semi-precious pebbles found on the beaches, and it's also a safe haven for a huge variety of bird life. The island is home to a single farming family and several thousand merino sheep that get to roam the island wild. And their fleeces are particularly fine, and all of the sheep are hand-shorn. So the colours are inspired by the indigenous flora and fauna found on the island, and they're designed to go very well together for colour work. There are 10 shades altogether, and we were gifted one skein for each shade. So this blue here is called Stanley, and Mum loves this hat so much that she asked me to make her one as well.
I did.
In this green called Tussock.
I think it'll go with my eyes, I hope.
Yeah. Okay, so now back to the pattern. The pattern uses DK weight yarn on 4mm needles for the brim and 5mm needles for the cables. Pebble Island is actually a worsted weight yarn, which is thicker than DK, so as a result my gauge is slightly larger than the recommended gauge. So according to the pattern, the circumference is supposed to be 40 centimetres, and mine turned out to be 48 centimetres. The height is meant to be 20 centimetres, and mine's 26 centimetres, but actually this is perfect because I knitted this hat for someone who has a larger sized head, and it fits him perfectly. But when I knitted this hat for Mum, I decided, hope it fits. This is the first time trying it on.
I know. I think it'll be fine.
I think it'll be fine too. It's still got to be blocked. But basically I decided to take out one of the pattern repeats, and I hope that was a good idea.
I think it will be.
And so that means to make the hat a bit shorter. And that means I've got 4 pattern repeats instead of 5 before I start to decrease.
Does it go with this jumper?
I think so, but you do say I'm a bit colourblind, so I wouldn't trust my judgment.
Well, I'll be very happy with it.
I'll leave it up to you to decide. Yeah. Anyway, although this hat pattern only has a single size to offer, I do think it's pretty easy to adapt the hat size, either by changing the yarn weight or the number of pattern repeats. So here's a close-up of the hat. It starts with a 1x1 rib tubular cast on, which makes it beautifully stretchy, and then you knit a 10cm brim. The folded brim is perfect for keeping the wind out of your ears. There are 2 different cables. The large cable is a horseshoe cable, and it is 16 stitches wide, but you only ever cross 2 stitches over 2 stitches, which you can easily do without a cable needle. The smaller cable reminds me of snakes twisting their bodies around a tree, so this is my favourite one. And it's made up of 4 travelling twisted stitches. Altogether, I found it a very easy and enjoyable knit.
So we filmed the upcoming interview with Brandon Mabley in September last year. And earlier this year in January, Brandon designed a new little collection for Rowan, and that's the Brandon Mabley collection here, this little book. So in this collection, you have a choice of either knitting a jacket or a jumper, and both the jacket and the jumper have dropped shoulders and they're both cropped. And this is a really easy style to knit because you have minimum shaping, and it's also a style that looks good on most body types. So once you've picked either the jacket or the jumper, you have a choice of 8 different colour work charts to follow, and all the charts use Intarsia, and they're all designed to work equally well with either the jacket or the jumper. And the idea is that the knitter can focus entirely on playing with colours and patterns, on a simple canvas without worrying about fitting the patterns into complex garment shaping. So in this way, Brandon is encouraging knitters just to go wild and be playful with their chosen colours. So I've been showing you all the different patterns that are available, but of course you can choose your own colourways.
So as you will see in the interview, Brandon can be pretty funny, and his humour is reflected in his pattern names. So one design is called Spotted You, and my particular favourite is Don't Make Me Cross.
Yes, that's it here. So it's got crosses all over it.
Yeah. And the recommended yarn for this collection is the Rowan Soft Yak DK, which is a blend of yak and cotton. And I think you've knitted with it a few times and you quite like it.
I have. I've done a couple of cardigans. It's a beautiful yarn and it holds up really well.
That's good. So with the Rowan Soft Yak DK, there are 23 colours to choose from, ranging from the softer colours with a grey undertone to bolder colours like bright orange or red. So you could create plenty of potential colour schemes with Brandon's collection, ranging from the bright and zany to the subtle and sophisticated. And Rowan has kindly offered Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount off both the yarn and the book for the Brandon Mabley collection when purchased together from the Rowan online store. This is a great limited offer just for our patrons, so thank you very much to Rowan.
We would like to remind you that we are entirely dependent on the financial support of our patrons to keep producing Fruity Knitting. We don't sell anything and we don't receive money for sponsorship or advertising. So we do ask, if you are watching Fruity Knitting, to please support our work by becoming a patron. We really do need new patrons. And it is very easy to be and flexible to become a patron, and you can pick your own level of support. And a huge thank you to all of the wonderful patrons who have kept Fruity Knitting going so far.
Yeah.
Now, it is terribly sad that the Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival had to be cancelled. We had prepared a ton of fantastic content that we were so excited to film and share with you, which unfortunately will no longer be possible. But as soon as we get over this immediate crisis of having no electricity or power, we really do hope to be able to get out and about and film some beautiful things that we can share with you in the next episode.
Yeah. And coming up now is the interview with Brandon Mabley, so it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Bye.
Bye.
Every morning, every evening, ain't we got fun? Not much money, oh but honey, ain't we got fun? The rent's unpaid, dear, we haven't a car. But anyway, dear, we'll stay as we are. Even if we owe the grocer, though we have fun. Tax collectors getting closer, still we have fun. There's nothing surer, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. In the meantime, in between time, ain't we got fun? Don't we have fun? Still we have fun.
You ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Good. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. Joining me is the artist and designer Brandon Mabley. Brandon regularly designs knitwear for Rowan, and he's part of the K Facet collective of artists, where his fabric designs are known for their witty and zany combinations of colour and pattern. Brandon also travels the world with K Facet, doing workshops, giving workshops on colour and design, and there he's really well appreciated for his teaching skills. So Brandon, I'm really happy to have you on Fruity Knitting. Thank you very much.
It's nice to be. I call you Juicy Knitting because it's very excited to be invited to be on your YouTube channel. It's an amazing world that we're in because basically we're two artists that collaborate. Myself and Kaif. We kind of are like two hermits in our little den in North London where we're based, but we step out into the world for about. Before COVID, we were traveling on and off for about 5 months of the year, teaching having museum exhibitions and lecturing. And basically our world is purely about playing with arrangements of colour in any medium we can. Some will know us for just our knitwear. Some will know us primarily for our fabric and not know that we do the other things. But we've dipped and dived into needlepoint, mosaic, rag rugs.
Yeah.
Cave's got a reputation for his paintings, where he first originated from. I paint too, and so yeah, we've done ceramics and other things, and it's an amazing world, because when we come home, we knuckle down. We don't have a large social circle. We pretty much work, and then when we go out, we meet thousands of people, hordes of people, and then we come home again and we just barrel down.
Isolated again.
Get
That's
on
true.
with it, yes.
Well, I want to talk to you first of all about your early relationship with Cave, because I see your story as an artistic Cinderella story, because before meeting Cave you had little education and no formal art training, but after meeting Cave on the street you came back to his studio, did volunteer work, and very quickly became indispensable to him.
Wow, you've done your homework.
Yes, I try to. And then Cave really fostered you artistically, but you in turn really enabled Cave and his business to grow and flourish. So I'd like you to tell the audience about just your early days of your meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it was, when you hear about these stories of a chance happening in the street, it purely was. I mean, I was brought up in a small seaside town on the south coast of Wales, where I was a surfer and a skateboarder, and I did all those teenage things. And then I went I wanted to go to art college. My parents were discouraging of that because they couldn't see this small town boy blossoming in an industry that is so temperamental, and they wanted me to learn a trade. So I went to I didn't do really well in school because I have a level of dyslexia and attention disorder, I suppose. But they encouraged me to go to catering college, which I did, and learned hotel management. And from there, I moved to London for my training, and then went straight to America, where I I worked for about 3 years, and then came back to London and had a short stint in Greece, where I was the private cook to the British ambassador. That was a bit of a fluke, and that was incredible. Then I came back to London, and I settled in the northwest, in an area called West Hampstead, which is northwest London, and I was waiting for a bus. I didn't, of course, I was, how old was I? 20. And waiting for a bus, and there was this tall chap, handsome chap, wearing, if I remember, he was wearing a long black coat, quite shoulders broad, and kind of looking quite friendly. Anyway, I struck up a conversation, and automatically I saw he was American, and conversation led on to that he was an artist and worked with textiles and had done some books. So, of course, curiosity killed the cat. And he said, well, when you're passing by, I live like 2 blocks away from here. I don't have any curtains, and you can see on the wall I'm working on a tapestry that's going to go in one of the books. So, and he's just passed by, and you can have a look at kind of what my work's like. Well, of course, it was my day off, so I rang the doorbell. I mean, I wasn't going to just be standing on the street trying to be nosy. You think I'm a bit weird. So I came into the studio, and it was on the first floor of this semi-detached 3-story house, or 3.5-story house. And the front living room, which was about 30 foot long, with these big bay windows, 3 large lights, pouring in lots of natural light. And there was about, about 5 people sitting on the floor or on piles of cushions, and they're all knitting. And it was like as if I'd gone to a WI meeting, but they're all young. I mean, there was one lady that was, I think, about in the mid-40s, a lady called Ellie McCready, and she was an established needlepointer. Another guy who had worked for the electricity board for all his life, and then took retirement and decided he wanted further on. So he came and helped Cave too. And so it just felt like a very homely situation and quite easy for me to fit into. because also I could cook. I'd make lunch and I would tidy up, and so
No wonder you were indispensable,
well, it won me some.
providing food for artists.
Yeah, it won me some brownie points at the beginning, and it was like walking into Aladdin's cave, because just to give you a visual, on the floor the floor was covered in different Keelam carpets. The walls were braced with spools of yarn, huge baskets of different yarns with different colorways. So you had a basket for red and a basket for blue. Also, Radio 4 was playing, which is a station that Cave is wedded to. I mean, he listened to it non-stop. And so they were listening to these radio plays. And, I mean, who would not want to be around that situation? Plus, London is quite a cold place, and I didn't know anybody here. So it was quite easy for me to fit in. And so I started coming around on my days off. And in that time, Cave could see that my curiosity was kicking in. I didn't have any idea what level he was on, and so because I was just kind of raw and instinctive, I would just spurt out a question, and Cave seemed to respond to my curiosity and said to me, "Well, have a go. Just try. If you haven't had a go, you don't know." So he would sit me down with some watercolors, paints, and a brush, and then he would just let me explore by trying out some little samples by myself. So he wasn't saying, do this, do that, do this, do that. He was saying, listen, look at what you're going to try and interpret and just get a feeling of it. So he would just allow me to try, and that sort of let me start to find my own little, like a child taking its first footsteps. He allowed me to find my own voice rather than him, rather than taking a cookie cutter and trying to make me into exactly the same cookie cutter like everybody else was in the studio. And so same with the knitting and the needlepoint and the mosaic, it's never been a case of do it this way, do it that way. And what I learned was he was doing for me everything that I wasn't allowed to do when I was in school, because I struggled. I was being pushed down and told, no, don't do this. No, don't do that. No, don't do this. And a lot of people used to ask me when I was a youngster, what do you want to do when you grow up? Quite often I think I'd like to be a teacher to get my own back. And it wasn't a case of that, but we're all structured in very different ways. And what he was allowing me to do was to find my own voice and learn what I liked and what I didn't. And when I created an arrangement, he was able to come along and say, well, this works, but maybe that doesn't work. And you could try it this way. And so then I could start seeing the different balances. And
so what was your early experience of, say, knitting and needlepoint? Did you take to the craft easily, like physically?
No, well, the first thing that I had to learn was that the secret of Cave's designs was that don't be afraid of colour. And more colours. Cave has a motto: if in doubt, add 20. No, if in doubt, add 20 more colours, because they will counterbalance. It's not, and so if you've got a whole basket of colours, if you've got 20 colours, you're not going to go wrong. Even if you're going to go go with stripes, they will counterbalance as you move on with them. You've got to have the conviction to put all those colours together. There's only two basic techniques that we use, and that's intarsia and fair isle. Intarsia is when you knit blocks of colour. Fair isle is when you knit two colours across the row, and then you learn to eventually do what we call stranding, or you weave in your tail ends or the yarn that you're not working with at the back of your knitting. Anybody that's interested in that, you can see tutorials I give online through my website, brandonmabley.com.
Okay, so just let's go back and can you just very quickly say a little bit about how you helped Cave clean up his studio, make it more efficient?
Well, okay, so I don't think he had a couch. I don't think the television was on the floor. There wasn't a fitted carpet, for instance. Cave is very instinctive, and so he will pick up, because he's working on lots of projects at once. I mean, when I say lots, inevitably there'll be 6 projects on the go. So I like to form a little bit of structure. So I'd put those into places, and I wouldn't really ask, I would just do. And he didn't seem to mind in a sense. And I put the television on a table, cover the table. So I was not trying to take anything away from the aesthetics that he had, but it was just creating a little bit of structure that was missing from the studio. Also, because I didn't know who this chap was, I was not afraid to just have a go. I remember going home to my mom and saying, oh, and she used to knit. And I said to her, oh, have you heard of this chap called Kaif Fassett? And she said, oh, yes, he does that fancy knitting with lots of colour. I was like, oh, yeah, he's a friend of mine. I'm going around there on my days off to help out. And she looked at me and she said, Brandon, I hope you're not making a nuisance of yourself.
I can just imagine.
Yeah.
It's a typical mum thing to say.
Well, there you go. And, I think now she looks back and smiles, and, it's 30 years on, I'm still here.
Yeah. And you also helped him organise the business side of things more.
Well, when you're in your creative mode and you're trying to flow with what you're doing, the last thing you want to do is to deal with answering the telephone, making appointments, dealing with communication. And although a lot of people only get to see the visuals that come out from us, the amount of admins behind that, there's...
I understand completely.
Yeah, interviews like yourself, magazine shoots, there's book shoots need scheduling, then there's also all the different people that we deal with. So there is a lot of administration of dealing with all the different outsourcing and what comes in and goes out. And so I learned off the hoof. I mean, when I started at the studio, we were dealing with typewriters and fax machines. Do you remember what those were?
Yes, yes.
I mean, I'm sure your daughter might not remember what a fax machine is, but yeah, Kaif was just quite comfortable to allow it, me to do that, because my interest was there.
Yeah.
And I'm a very curious person, and the last thing I would ever want to do is stop being curious.
Okay, well, let's start talking about your designing, because you're designing both knitwear and fabrics for quilters. So can you just sort of describe, first of all, in a general way, what motivates you when you're designing, and maybe describe your work or your aesthetic?
I learned a very good lesson that when you're designing, you don't design for a reason, design for the process. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the end result, and then you'll find a place for it. And so I'm not designing some designers will design a collection and think this goes with that, and that goes with this, and this goes with that. We create a color palette, and then we, for instance, with the fabrics, we'll create a color story. Oh, I'm missing a bit of blue, so I'll maybe do a blue colorway, or I'm missing a purple or a red or a yellow. With the knitwear, often we're sent storyboards, but we don't get time to knit for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So primarily I design for 3 different international magazines besides Rowan. So we will sit down, they'll send us a storyboard mm-hmm. of the colour mood that they're going to be doing. And usually it's about a year in advance that they will be doing this. And then they'll suggest the yarn. So we'll look at the yarn range that we can use from, we design primarily with Rowan yarns. Part of the reason we stick with Rowan is that they're 100% natural fibre. We love their felted tweed and their kid silk haze. The colour intensity is pretty on the mark. I mean, we love it when they ask for our advice, and Kaif has done an extended range for them, so that pleases us, because for us we get to use a little bit more excitement with the colours. Yeah.
Now, you've recently done a book, or actually not so recently. I think it was published 2006.
Yeah.
Tell us about this book.
Yeah, this is there's 3 books under my name, mm-hmm. just not so they don't get confused. And this is a book. A lot of people are always trying to get behind our design process, and we all dry up and think, where do I get an idea from? And I did this book based on my travels around the world and how I pick up inspiration from wherever I travel. I mean, for instance, the shirt that I'm wearing, it's a design called Dapple, and it was basically, I was looking at the chewing gum when I come out of the tube station just down the road from where a lot of people have just discarded their chewing gum and it's stuck to the floor, and it just has created this amazing abstract pattern of little dots. And so that threw me the idea to do this shirt called, then we gave it a funky name, Dapple. So yeah, with this book, this design on the front actually will relate a little bit to you. This design on the front is called Been to Australia and to the Outback, and this design is inspired by the colours of the Outback, and it's a design called Uluru.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got some designs here in front of us, and they are based on physical things that you've seen. And this book is sort of shows you the physical images that you were first looked at and got inspired by. And some of them are everyday things that you think people would just be walking by.
Absolutely.
So we've taken 4 from the collection. So tell us the story behind the design for each of them.
So this is a design from. I was trying to think, what do I choose from America that gives us a colour impact? And America is so diverse, and there's so many impressions. But what struck me the most is the fall leaves, and I took from the Rowan Summer Tweed yarn, which was a wool and silk mix. I created this design that came off an Indian basket weave pattern, which was basically it was a black and white geometric design, like stacked triangles. And so I did this intarsia design. One of the things that we always pay attention to when we're finishing our design is the border, because a border can make or break a design. And so what I've done with the border is I've incorporated a kind of a beadwork pattern with from the designs, the colours that I've got going through the design in with the border, and then it's knitted in intarsia. And so I knitted in intarsia because I'm knitting blocks of colour. I'm not carrying or needing any of the carrying.
Yes, great. Okay, so
I had the fortune of being part of a international dog race in Alaska, where you go with a bunch of huskies through the wilderness in Alaska, called the Iditarod Dog Race. It's incredibly beautiful, and one thing that you learn is that snow is a carrier for colour, or any shade of colour you have around there. So I was picking up inspiration from the snow and the landscape that was around there, and I incorporated it into this design called Glacier, and it's basically a Fair Isle design. And so I've, rather than taking a pure white, I've taken an off cream, but then I've done an ombre shaded stripe behind the cream, so it creates this kind of soft movement, and it's a very, when you look at snow, you get all these different shades in there, and you don't get real pure white. You get little, you get cool blues, you get warm ochres, you get icy blues, and you get the little minty greens, and all these colours were in this in the Rowan colour palette. And so I just played with little hints of colour that just sort of tickled it up, and it just was quietly there. I think it's kind of a timeless palette. It won't date. One of the most inspiring countries we've been to is South Africa, where they have such an innate, abundant use of colour and design. And partly that's because it hasn't been suppressed by education and been told that they can't do. They just go at whatever they feel like doing. For instance, they make these wire baskets out of telephone wires, and they basically cut down telephone wires, open up the plastic, and take out all the different coloured thread, and they'd weave these amazing baskets. And in the townships, they decorate any surface they can. For instance, the interiors of the houses were covered in the same wrappings for baked beans. It'd just be like wallpaper. I mean, it was just so humbling and touching. Anyway, I saw this garbage can at a school, and it was all covered in children's handprints. They'd all taken their own handprint, and then they painted inside the handprint. And to me, it was just like something that belonged in the museum. So I had to take that, and you'll see in the picture that we're going to be showing of some cushions that I did where the colours are a little jollier than this. Then I also did this sweater for, sometimes men can be a little boring with the colours.
I was going to say, this is pretty safe.
This is safer, and and I like the idea of somebody having the hand on the back of a man when he's not behaving or something, and
pushing him in the right direction.
You just give him, pushing him in the right direction. That's very good. So here I just took, I didn't want a solid background, so I took. It's with the Rowan felted tweed, and I took I got the striped rib, and then I alternated the stripes in the background, so it just gave it a warm a velvety texture rather
and not
than
too flat.
No, I didn't want a flat, and also this would be quite a solid lump. It kind of looked like a bar of dark chocolate, but just add in this warm burnt red colour, and then I like the way that it sat next to this cool black and this cold grey. I think it was just very wearable, handsome palette for any age group. Any kind of guy could wear that. It doesn't have a kind of a time zone on it. Again, coming back to America, I was stuck on what I was going to do for the US that would really encapsulate the US. And one thing that I came across was at the end of every street, there's a stop sign. And I just thought, wait a minute, this is right throughout the whole country. Everybody, but I'm sure that a lot of people will never think about that for inspiration. But also, what I'd also love was the Navajo blankets. There's something about the American Indian history and those geometric structures that are just so powerful to me. Anyway, I took both those elements, the colours from the stop sign and the structure from a Navajo blanket, and I created this design using chunky yarn. In the background, rather than having a solid colour, I've done a variegated stripe, so it goes from a rust to a burnt red to a rust to a burnt red, just to give it a little bit of a worn. I didn't want it to be too regimented, so I've done it kind of a variegated stripe, so it looks like it's worn out, and it doesn't look so flat. And then it's kind of bits. It's kind of like a old linen color.
Yeah.
I outlined with a cool blue because I want to add a little bit of warmth to that linen color rather than it just sit flat. It would look like somebody stuck a piece of chewing gum on your piece, and then you can see on the inside. You could actually wear this inside out; it'll look quite fabulous. And this is the inside, and also I ran the design to the edge because I didn't feel like it required a rib or a border. I just hemmed at the bottom, which I quite like, so it just falls off the edge. And the same with this sleeve too. I also like the shape to be quite comfortable. I don't feel like our style of designing needs a lot of tailoring. And I love tailoring on shirts and such, but I think with our knitting, I love doing just a canvas of knitting that people can then translate into their own kind of shape if they feel like. Okay. I know that you're quite handy in doing a little bit of snip and tuck.
Oh, I like to snip and tuck everything, change everything around. Now, I want you to just, while we're still talking about your style, I want you to very quickly show a little bit of needlepoint and fabric. So we'll get them now.
Okay. So needlepoint. With the needlepoint, we'll be inspired by a animal skin, and I love the idea of enlarging that for a needlepoint cushion, and that it just becomes a texture. And then this is a kit that's been part stitched. When you buy the needlepoint kit, it's all printed out for you, and you just fill in the colours as you go along. And this is the actual finished cushion. what I love about it is this lime green. A lot of people would go, ouch, that lime green when you see it as a big lump, but when it's a small, little bit of amount,
I love it.
it's just that little
Yeah.
bit of lime that you just add to that margarita.
Yes,
Lovely.
definitely. That's beautiful.
Okay, with fabric design, again, this is a half drop repeat, and I would have been inspired by something I can't think when. This is a design that's already out the market and it's doing extremely well. I wanted to create a design that would be an overall pattern, but also have a primitive movement, because it kind of when you cut this up into a diamond, that becomes intriguing. It's no longer an octopus. It has lots of different possibilities. Every design that we do, we have 5 different colorways on. And so this is the first colorway that I originated. And then I took it into black and white. I took it into blue and red. And then I took it into cool blues for those who wanted to do a baby blanket. I didn't think about what it was going to be used for. I just wanted to create this.
So you
pasture
always
colour.
try, once you come up with a design, you try to give the quilters options
Yes,
with whatever they want to do.
because
And so,
everybody
yeah.
likes different colours for different reasons.
Yeah.
But we like to push the boundaries. So when we create a quilt, we'll use maybe 4 of these fabrics in with 18 other fabrics that
Yeah,
we're going to use.
yeah.
I'll show a little
Yeah.
demonstration on the back.
Okay, so next up, I would sort of like to give you to give the audience a bit of a mini workshop, because you often say that when you are putting patterns and colours together, the eye has to travel.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to explain what that concept means and give some examples of how you help people to do that. And primarily just explain, which is a typical question that a lot of people would be asking, what's the difference between exciting, vibrant craziness and an ugly eyesore?
We all like different colours for different reasons, and so we should. But you should also all understand that any colour can be used. It all depends on where you place it and what you place it with. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of example with these yarns. For instance, a lot of people would go into a yarn shop and they would bypass a whole wall covered in this wonderful
Not me.
lime Mrs. Kermit Frog, this lime yellow. But this is an amazing colour. A lot of people don't feel like they could actually wear this colour. But for instance, if you were to take it with next to this beautiful bottle green, place it next to there, they fight. This green gets darker, this gets lighter. But if I were to take it next to this old toffee colour, or maybe like a digestive biscuit, put it next to there, they have a little softer relationship.
It's true.
But-
It does soften this down, doesn't
yeah,
it?
or if you break down to a small amount of it, or even if I were to take my wristwatch and take that small amount of that orange and place that next to what that does to this, it makes this more from a digestive biscuit to a honeycomb colour, and it makes more exciting. And so it's all about what one colour does to another. Now, if you want to be a bumblebee, then that might be the ticket that you want to go with. But if you don't want to have a hard contrast, then I would personally avoid that kind of combination altogether. But it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. I love cooking, and maybe hopefully some of you do too. You've got to think about when you add that little bit of lemon juice to the orange soup when you're making it, or that little bit of ginger to the orange soup, or when you're making muesli. You need those little bit of, when you add that little bit of,
discord. You need a tiny bit of discord to make the harmony really exciting when you get there.
it's like when you put on lipstick. What does it do? It lifts it. You're not covering your whole face in the lipstick. You might do, but I don't. I don't wear lipstick. But when you put on lipstick, you feel a little bit more. Whew, now we can go out and party. But
Okay, so let's have a look at the quilt behind us, and you can, because it's very vibrant and beautiful, but I want you to try to make it ugly.
right. Well, okay. So one of the most important design elements that you have to think about is when you're doing a design, what that's going to look like when it's walking down the street or when it's across the room on a couch, or you always see your designs from a distance. So don't assess it for when it's up close or when it's on your lap, because the first thing I say to people when they're in my workshops and they come up to lunchtime, and I said, how many of you stand back from your work when you're working on a project? And it's amazing how few people put their hands up. It's one of the most important things we do. So for instance, this quilt here, when we're up close, these colours look like sherbet colours. From a distance, they look really cool because you're starting to pick up all these other lighter tones that kind of add a little bit of ice and sugar palette to the whole thing. Now, if I were to cover up some of the lighter areas, just with some, just little, I'm just playing with this randomly, and you'll start seeing that these look like black holes when you get back from a distance. But if I were to take them away,
if they freshen up again.
Freshen up again. So that's what I talk about, that eye has to travel. You don't want your eye to get stuck in a pothole or something to scream out like this big yellow, unless that's what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve something with a real contrast, then make the whole thing a real strong contrasted story. But it's not about, you don't want your eye to be drifting off to this direction or your eye to be drifting off to, like for instance, if I were to take this ball and I were to put it right here, what would you be looking at? The black ball or the green? Or if you were to take a small amount of it, it still doesn't work. But then
it's very dominant, isn't it?
But then if I take some of this lime green, that vicious little bit of lime green, put that in there, it's like the lime and the gin and tonic.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, great. Okay, so the feedback people give about you is that you are a great communicator and a great encourager, particularly when you're travelling around the world giving workshops. So can you now just talk about how you are helping people to overcome their fear of colour and experimentation? Because I come across that a lot too in the interviews that we do and feedback from knitters who go to workshops and things. Quite a few of them, surprisingly few of them, are really quite frightened of using colour. So how do you help them get over that? What are some of the things that you do in your workshop, the little exercises that you do to get them to break free?
Yeah, I'm not a teacher, I'm an encourager. I believe that all of us have the ability to have a go, but it's also not doing what I'm telling you to do. It's you finding what you like. And so you pick your own colour palette and that you start playing with those. I mean, first and foremost, you have to have enough colours to start playing with and then start seeing the possibilities. Also, you need to have enough available to you to be able to make substitutions, to take something away. You don't know until you've got it in there or up there if it works or if it isn't. Plus, whatever you've got on your row, you don't know how that colour is going to work until you get something next to it, or until you're 5 rows on and you've got more of that colour, or you brought in another colour and that's speaking to what you've got further down. Now, getting that past to somebody who's very structural or likes a very regimented way of working, like as if they're doing a ballroom dancing class, you just have to try and let it speak to you. But the first and foremost thing that you have to remember is we all look better from a distance, and so does your work. Isn't that true?
It's true.
It is true. I mean, like for instance, this little lavender that you have lined up here, if that was a ball you're working with, you'd think, Hail Mary, that ball is not going to look good in here. A small amount of it from a distance is the perfect ticket. Yeah. But the little row that you have going up here, you can hardly see. It's just that little stitch. So, it's...
Great advice.
It isn't something that I can impart into words. It's something that I'm encouraging you to have a go. Don't be afraid of. Also, if you do a little bit of a little swatch and it's not what you want, don't discard that. Put that aside, and then do another swatch, and then eventually you'll have enough swatches that you'll be able to learn and look back and say, this was good, that's not bad. Or you might look back and say, well, I've changed my mind, I've improved. And as Cave showed you with one of those sample blankets that he showed in his interview, that, he saved all his swatches and he was able to make them into those incredible sampler blankets. And I don't think you could make anything more personal.
Yeah.
And also it's a learning blanket.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience on fruity knitting. We really appreciate it.
I hope we've been juicy.
We have been. Okay. We'll say goodbye to the audience. Bye.
Do you want to try the last part again?
No, that was
can
great.
leave that in.
Leave that in. That was great. Okay.
I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do, and saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my